Here we are at I think the end stages of what's been a long process with regard to the buffer ordinance, and I think based upon our presentation to council a couple of weeks ago, we're ready to act on it. So what we need to do, just to outline for council, is there's a couple steps in this process. Mr. Moore, and jump in, Mr. Moore, if I've got any of these wrong, but he's going to read the short title, and then we have the recommendations from planning and zoning. I have a motion to adopt those recommendations, and then there were several additional amendments, and I have motions for each one of those. And at the end of that, Mr. Moore will read the short title as amended, and then there's a motion for your consideration that I'll read to adopt the whole thing with all the amendments. It's going to take a little bit of time, but the way Title IX describes our ordinance adoption process, we have to go through it. So with that, Mr. Moore.
Okay, and after I read the motion, we do not want to move for adoption or approval of this motion at this time because there's, as he indicated, it's going to be a series of motions that have to be made afterwards. So the ordinance itself is an ordinance amend Chapter 99, Sections 99.5, 99.6, 99.7, 99.23, 99.24, 99.26, and 99.30, and Chapter 115, Sections 115.4, 115.25, 115.193, 115.220, 115-221 regarding certain drainage features, wetland and water resources, and the buffers there too. And Mr. Robertson, the floor is yours for your amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And for as much brevity as we can add to this process, instead of reading each one of those sections, I'm going to refer to it as the drainage and buffer ordinance in each one of these motions. I won't have to say that a whole bunch of different times. So the first amendment is to adopt the planning and zoning recommended revisions to the ordinance. And that motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance to include the amendments recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Pleasure, council.
I move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley.
Second.
Second, Mr. Schaefer. Questions on the motion? We'll take the vote. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Obvious, motion carried. Next, sir.
Okay, the next one is, this is an amendment to Section 99-6H of the subdivision ordinance, which was part of this drainage and buffer ordinance. In that section, currently we have requirements for mandatory information in the developer's restrictive covenants. We've updated that to reference these requirements. So that motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 2 of the ordinance regarding Section 99-6 of the subdivision code includes an amendment to Section 99-6H with the following revisions to Section 99-6H. So H will now state H. When the land being subdivided contains wetlands, either state or federal, and we're adding in, or a resource with resource buffers, the recorded restrictive covenants or declaration for the subdivision and the deeds to the lots to be conveyed, and then we're deleting containing wetlands, and then continuing, shall include a disclosure statement that reads, quote, this site contains regulated wetlands, and we're adding, or a resource with resource buffers governed by the Sussex County zoning and subdivision codes. Then continuing with what it already says, activities within these wetlands may require a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and or the state of Delaware. And then we're adding a sentence, disturbance of a resource or resource buffer may be a violation of the Sussex County zoning and subdivision codes for which penalties or other remedies may be imposed by Sussex County. And that's that motion.
Pleasure, council.
Move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley.
Second.
Second, Mr. Schaefer. Questions on the motion? Take the vote. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Obvious, motion carried. Next.
Okay, the third motion is an amendment to the final site plan requirements in the subdivision code, basically what has to be shown on a final site plan. So that motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 6 of the ordinance regarding Section 99-26A, parentheses 21, close parentheses, of the subdivision code includes the following sentence at the end of Section A thereof as follows, quote, In addition, the boundaries shall be marked on the site itself with permanent markers or signage with the location and type of signage depicted on the final plat, close quote, and by creating a new section, parentheses, little I, close parentheses, thereof as follows, quote, and then parentheses, little I, close quote, or close parentheses. That disturbance of the resource buffers on the site may result in penalties imposed pursuant to Section 115-193K of the Sussex County Zoning Code, close quote. And that's that motion.
Pleasure, council.
Move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley.
Second.
Second, Mr. Schaefer. Questions on the motion? Take the vote, Mr. Schaefer.
Yes.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Riley.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
I vote yes, motion carried.
Thank you. The fourth one is an amendment to require signage and markers. This motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 10 of the ordinance regarding Section 115-193 of the Zoning Code includes an amendment to Section 115-193 capital A to revise the heading for subsection A so that it now states resource buffer widths and adding the words and markers, and by adding a new subsection A, capital A, 4, that states as follows, quote, 4, the upland edge of all resource buffers shall be clearly marked with a permanent, the upland edge of all resource buffers shall be clearly marked with permanent in-ground markers and signage located at 100-foot intervals. Such signage shall be at least 5 inches by 7 inches in size, close quote. And that's that motion.
Pleasure, council.
Move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley.
Second.
Second, Mr. Hudson. Questions on the motion? We'll take the vote. Mr. Schaefer.
Yes.
Mrs. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Riley.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
I vote yes, motion carried. Next.
Okay, the fifth one is an amendment to confirm that buffer averaging can only occur within buffers along the same resource. And this motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 10 of the ordinance regarding Section 115-193 of the Zoning Code includes an amendment to Section 115-193 to revise subsection B, that's capital B1, and to add a new subsection capital B2, parentheses F, close parentheses, so that buffer averaging can only occur within buffers along the same resource, so that section capital B1 now states as follows. 1, resource buffer width averaging may be utilized, and then we're adding, but only within resource buffers adjacent to the same resource, and then continuing, to adjust the required Zone B resource buffer width, thereby allowing flexibility for the proposed development so long as the overall square footage of the Zone B resource buffer is maintained, and to insert a new subsection, capital B2, and then F in parentheses as follows. F in parentheses, the Zone B resource buffer averaging shall only occur within the resource buffer adjacent to the same resource.
Pleasure,
That's the
council.
motion.
I'll make the motion. Do we have a second?
Second it.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Questions?
I'm reading here at the same time.
Question on the motion? We'll take the vote. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
I vote yes, motion carried. Next.
So this is the sixth one, and this regards that table that's in the body of the ordinance regarding permitted uses, and we had some clarifications on that. So this motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 10 of the ordinance regarding Section 115-193 of the Zoning Code includes an amendment to Section 115-193C to revise Table 2 resource buffer activities permitted by zone by amending cells 17 and 18 and adding a new cell 24 as follows. And so remember, there's those cells within that table, and we're making some changes. So amending cell 17 so that it now states as follows, quote, walking trails where any impervious area runoff is managed under a Sussex Conservation District permit that are generally perpendicular to a resource for the purpose of providing access to the resource or a permitted activity within the resource buffer. And that was just some wording change. Amending cell 18 so that it now states that extended detention, dry and wet stormwater management ponds are not permitted in Zone B, and adding a new cell number 24 that states walking trails running by and with a resource, then in parentheses, i.e. generally parallel with the resource, close parentheses, where any impervious area runoff is managed under a Sussex Conservation District permit are not permitted in Zone A and permitted in Zone B. And that's that motion.
Pleasure, council.
Question on that.
Sure.
The surface of the walking trail is not specified, is it? So they're permitted to do asphalt, for example?
That's probably Mr. Medlar's question, but that the trigger is the Sussex Conservation District permit in that language.
I think the answer is yes.
Unless the surface is pervious, i.e. mulch, it would require and trigger a conservation district permit if it exceeds the square footages. But you remember the square footage trigger is very low. It's a couple thousand square feet, so
So they can put in a walking trail that's mulch with no permit.
with no permit, that is
But if they
correct.
want something impervious like asphalt, they'd have to get a permit.
Yes.
But it's.
Now, in
And
different,
the conservation district would set the criteria for that?
the criteria actually set in the stormwater regulations, so there's different surfaces, like, for example, clamshells has a different curve number as asphalt. Porous asphalt would have a different curve number as regular. So most likely, if you do anything like from the compacted stone dust and more impervious, you would 99% trigger a permit. If you go below that, like a clamshell or an open mulch type trail, would not.
More questions? Pleasure, council.
Move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Hudson. I'll second the motion. Question on the motion? Take the vote, Mr. Shaver.
Yes.
Mrs. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Riley.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
I'm yes, motion carried. Next.
Just so everybody knows we're gaining on it. We're almost there. And this one's an easy one, I hope. This is the seventh one, and it's just to correct a reference from native to natural in Section 115-193D. So this motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the Drainage and Buffer Ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 10 of the ordinance regarding Section 115-193 of the Zoning Code includes an amendment to Section 115-193, capital D, 2, and then B in parentheses, to replace the word, quote, native, close quote, with the word, quote, natural, close quote, in the second line.
Pleasure, council.
Can I ask what the difference is?
Mr. Riley.
I mean,
That's really,
I
so
know the weeds here.
natural
No pun
is
intended, but-
defined, and it was a situation where in the planning and zoning recommendation, every place else was changed to natural, and this is just one outlier where that word wasn't changed.
So that's just saying whatever happens to spring up on its own? I mean,
Yeah, that's,
we're
yeah.
not going to require them to make sure there's no non-native species in there? That's
Yeah,
what
that's
what it's
correct.
saying?
And it's a consistency issue, yeah.
There was also,
Madam Clerk.
if I may, the discussion was also that the native plant list is always a little bit in flux. So the word native sort of led us towards that list. And because we didn't adopt the list, so the word natural was the more, the better word to use in the ordinance. So it had to do with it really had to do with the approved listing, and that was the main driver why we went from native to natural.
Yeah, so we're not going to make them manage the zone and make sure there's no non-native species
No.
in there?
It has nothing to do with it.
I
It
think
has
that
everything
makes
to do with
sense,
Yeah.
personally. I mean,
Because it would have just created more problems.
it gets more and more complex. and
Pleasure, council, on this motion.
I'll move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley.
Second.
Second, Mr. Hudson. Question on the motion? We'll take the vote. Mr. Shaver.
Yes.
Mrs. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Riley.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
I will yes, motion carried. Next, sir.
Okay, this next one has to do with the quote-unquote resource buffer options that were in Section G, and we heard a lot about that. And this one amends those options to clarify the language and to confirm that the options cannot be used along tidal waters or wetlands. So to accomplish that, there's some word changes that are covered by this motion. Be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the Drainage and Buffer Ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 10 of the ordinance regarding Section 115-193 of the Zoning Code includes an amendment to Section 115-193G so that subsection G1 now states as follows. 1. A proposed development shall be permitted to utilize the following options consistent with Section 193, Section B, resource buffer with averaging, to incentivize the retention of forests, comma, and then we're adding, but only for those resource buffers adjacent to perennial non-tidal rivers and streams, non-tidal wetlands, and intermittent streams. And in subsection G1, parentheses A, close parentheses, parentheses B, close parentheses, and parentheses C, close parentheses, the phrase, quote, like zone land, close quote, is replaced by the phrase, quote, a residential subdivision, residential conditional use, or residential planned community. So that last one, that's the motion. That last one, again, was just some wordsmithing that we did on our end for clarity, because like zone land really didn't mean anything. So that's that motion.
Pleasure, council.
I move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley, second, Mr. Schaefer. Questions on the motion?
I have a question.
Mr. Hudson.
When it comes to the buffer averaging, I might be a little bit out of place here, but if you're taking buffer from one area and using another area as part of the averaging, can that area be a meadow when it was forested here? Can that area be a meadow over here and non-forested?
So a couple things. This is the options, and we're talking about averaging. That's one that there are two different situations.
Okay, I'm not in the right ballpark.
Yeah, no, but
Okay.
but yes, but remember it's on the same resource.
Yes.
So there's that limiting factor, but with the averaging, there's not a distinction between the types. So it could be averaging meadow or forest.
We can have that amended. We can work on amendments.
Sure. You would amend it? You want amendments now?
We probably shouldn't work on amendments now, should we?
I would prefer not.
I would think if we're going to do anything, we go through this,
Yeah.
and if we adopt everything, then we can have another
Right.
down the road, a month or
Okay,
whatever.
okay, gotcha.
Because there's some on that. I mean, and you're right, Mr. President. There's guardrails on that. So remember, it's only along the same resource. So if you have something that's on a perennial stream that's unrelated to wetlands over here, that can't mix. If you have along a stream an area where there's meadow and forest, you can average that, however you choose.
But something's been sticking in my mind, that when it was appropriate to.
Yeah. And I think, and Mr. Medlars maybe can jump in on here, there's a practical reason for that is that, there's the forest and the meadow, depending on the natural area that it currently is, it's all intermixed,
Okay.
pre-development.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Fair questions.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. Pleasure, council.
So moved.
Motion, Mr. Schaefer.
Second.
Second, Mr. Riley. Question on the motion? Take the vote, Mr. Schaefer.
Yes.
Mr. Green. Yes. Mr. Riley.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Aye, yes, motion carried. Next, sir.
This is the ninth one. This is another amendment to the resource buffer options to clarify the language again and confirm that the options cannot be used again along tidal waters or wetlands, and to remove the possibility of Zone A being touched by the options, and to confirm that off-site land preserved as a buffer cannot be farmed. So keep in mind, remember originally they talked about you could option both Zone A and B, and I know Mr. Riley had a real concern about that we didn't want to touch Zone A, so that potentially there was a concern that, the buffer could be eliminated completely.
Right.
With this motion that I'm going to read in a moment, you cannot touch Zone A, so that buffer will not be able to be eliminated completely all the way down to the edge of the resource. So the motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 10 of the ordinance regarding Section 115-193 of the zoning code includes an amendment to Section 115-193G so that subsection G2 now states as follows. 2. A proposed development shall be permitted to utilize the following options to incentivize the retention or expansion of resource buffers or provide an additional functional benefit of resource buffer forests. Then we're adding, but only for those resource buffers adjacent to perennial non-tidal rivers and streams, non-tidal wetlands, and intermittent streams. So we're saying you can have it here, which means you can't have it on the tidal waters and wetlands. And in subsection G2, lowercase a in parentheses, lowercase I in parentheses, and in parentheses, lowercase double I, and G2, B in parentheses, all references to Zone A are deleted, and the following additional sentences added at the end of subsections capital G2 little a in parentheses, little I in parentheses, and two little i's in parentheses, and G2, C in parentheses, little I in parentheses, and 2 in parentheses, adding, the area within this conservation easement shall adhere to the requirements of subsection D herein and shall not be used for agricultural purposes. And that's that motion.
Pleasure of council.
I'll move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley. Second, Mr. Hudson. Questions on the motion? We'll take the vote. Mr. Schaefer.
Yes.
Mrs. Green.
Yes.
Mr. Riley.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
I vote yes, motion carried. Next.
This is the 10th corrective or amendment motion. This is the one regarding penalties. I recall we had some discussions, quite a bit of discussion on this, and it was substantially revised, and we presented it to you all, I think, with a very workable program that's well defined. And so the motion is, be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 10 of the ordinance regarding Section 115-193 of the zoning code include a new subparagraph K concerning violations and penalties as follows. K, and the heading is violations and penalties. The owner of the land and any person or corporation who shall violate any provisions of this section shall be subject to the following penalties. Separate violations or a series of violations may be combined to determine the total area where the violation occurred. And then little a in parentheses, a fine of $10,000 per quarter acre of disturbance or part thereof shall be imposed, and little b in parentheses, resource buffer rehabilitation and replanting in the area where the violation occurred in accordance with a mitigation plan approved by the director shall comply with the following. And then in little I in parentheses, for every tree removed or destroyed with a caliper of 6 inches or greater at breast height, there shall be at least 3 replacement trees planted within the buffer area. 2 little i's in parentheses, the replacement trees shall be a native species. 3 little i's, the quality and size of the replacement trees shall be at least 2 inches caliber at breast height. Any tree that was removed or destroyed shall be replaced through the mitigation plan at a ratio of at least 1 inch per caliper at breast height for each inch of caliper removed. The property owner and or the party who violates this section shall be responsible for the health and survival of the replacement trees, including regular necessary watering for a minimum of 2 years, and shall replace any trees that die within 2 years of planting. Little 4 in parentheses, little Roman numeral 4 IV in parentheses. The replanting design shown within the mitigation plan shall provide adequate space for root and crown development. And parentheses C, no building or zoning permit shall be issued, nor shall any inspections occur within the phase where the violation occurred, parentheses including but not limited to building code and utility inspections, close parentheses, until the buffer rehabilitation is complete and approved by the director. That's the end of that motion. Just a little bit more background on that. Recall there's already penalty provisions in our zoning code. And so these mirror that in several respects in terms of withholding building permits. We already have that as a possibility for any violation of the zoning code. And then we worked with Mr. Medlar's, the tree replanting requirements mirror in large respect requirements they have for utility disturbance. Yeah, okay. So that's that motion.
We have a question on
Sure.
A. So the fine is $10,000, but it's not proratable. It's a, 10,000, and it's also shall. It's not may. So any part of the buffer that gets disturbed, you're in jeopardy of a $10,000 fine, and it's not proratable, and it's shall, it's not may. I honestly a little uncomfortable with that, but.
Well, I would just a couple thoughts on that. One is we wanted to make it clear in the body of the ordinance that there were ramifications, if you do violate. Yeah, and I would say also the way, and Mr. Moore can chime in on this as well, the way this would work in quote-unquote real life is that there would be an enforcement action that's taken by the constables through the court system on this. And, I think that could also be addressed in plea bargaining and those types of negotiations.
So this would be adjudicated through the courts, not through the county?
No, it's through the courts, right, through the constables'
And
enforcement.
the courts would have the
Ability to.
ability to negotiate this if they felt
Right.
justified.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's reasonable.
yeah.
Okay, pleasure of council.
I move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley, second,
Second.
Mr. Hudson. Questions on the motion? We'll take the vote. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Aye, yeah, motion carried, sir.
Okay, and then one more amendment to the whole thing, and this is just referring to site plans again, really just mirrors what we did for subdivision final site plans. This takes care of the same thing in the zoning code. This is the 11th one. Be it moved that Sussex County Council amend the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended by the Commission so that Section 12 of the ordinance regarding Section 115-221B, parentheses 19, of the zoning code includes the following sentence to the end of subsection parentheses A, or it's little a, parentheses little a, close parentheses, thereof as follows. In, quote, in addition, the boundaries shall be marked on the site itself with permanent markers and signage, with the location and type of signage depicted on the final site plan, close quote, and by creating a new subsection, little j in parentheses, thereof as follows, quote, little j in parentheses, the disturbance of the resource buffers on the site may result in penalties imposed pursuant to Section 115-193K of the Sussex County Zoning Code. And that's
Thank
it
you,
in the
Counsel.
motion.
Move for adoption.
Motion, Mr. Riley,
Second.
second, Mr. Hudson. Questions on the motion? Take the vote. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson? I vote yes, motion carried.
Okay, so now is the point where we go back to the whole thing. Mr. Moore is going to read the short title as amended.
Yes.
And then I have a motion.
Mr. President, it's an ordinance to amend Chapter 99, Sections 99-5, 99-6, 99-7, 99-23, 99-24, 99-26, and 99-30, and Chapter 115, Sections 115-4, 115-25, 115-193, 115-220, and 115-221 regarding certain drainage features, wetland and water resources, and the buffers thereto, as amended by the 11 motions made by council, and as further reasons given that Mr. Robertson will read into the record, numbered 1 through 6.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And so that motion is be it moved that Sussex County Council adopt the drainage and buffer ordinance as amended based upon the recommendations and amendments of the Planning and Zoning Commission and the amendments made this morning, and for the following reasons. 1, this initiative has its origins in the 2018 Comprehensive Plan calling for code amendments to protect waterways and wetlands, which are recognized as valuable open space of ecological importance. These goals, objectives, and strategies of the comprehensive plan are identified in detail in the whereas clauses of the ordinance. 2, a working group that included many different stakeholders with a variety of business, professional, and academic backgrounds was convened over many months to establish the framework for amending Chapters 99 and 115 of the Code of Sussex County regarding resource protection, buffers, and the maintenance of waterways and drainage areas. This ordinance is the result of that effort along with input from county staff. 3, there is appropriate flexibility through averaging and incentives that is contained in the ordinance. It also includes several incentives with intent to preserve and protect the existing resources such as forested areas on both sides of a waterway when that is most beneficial. This will result in an improved protection of natural resources while providing design flexibility for future development. 4, this ordinance strikes a proper balance between the protection of land values and the protection of resources. For instance, this ordinance protects these resources in a way that should result in better residential development plans without materially affecting the density of residential development. 5, there has been a lot of public comment about the ordinance during the public hearings. While there was not significant opposition to the ordinance as a whole, there were constructive comments made during the process. This ordinance, as amended, reflects many of those suggestions made during the public hearing process. And 6, this ordinance will promote and protect the health, safety, convenience, orderly growth, and welfare of the inhabitants of Sussex County.
Pleasure of council. Motion, Mr. Schaefer.
Second.
Second, Mr. Riley. Questions on the motion?
I have a question.
Mr. Hudson.
Section 13, effective date.
That one, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended 6 months. And there was a reason for that.
That's what I want to hear, because I'm worried about a glut of applications coming in and a glut of clear cutting prior to this taking effect.
Yeah, no, well, and the commission chose, and I think you all, well, certainly we talked about it, and it was adopted with the motion earlier to make it the 6 months, because that was a commission recommendation. I think it was actually introduced with 6 months in it, if I recall. And the reason for that is that there's significant lead time by the time you go through plus. By the time you design your project, you have to have the wetlands delineated to know where the resources are to do the resource buffers. It's a complex process that has a lot of momentum going forward. And we couldn't make it, the thought was we couldn't or didn't want to make it happen and require people to go all the way back to square one on this. The flip side of that is because there's so much preliminary work that occurs, with today's subdivision land use plans, you can't throw something together in a month or two. It's just impossible. I mean, there's too much engineering that's going on. There's too much state and federal review, delineations, and everything else. So the 6 month time period was, I would say, a reasonable decision to capture anybody who hasn't yet started, but allow people to go forward who are already in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's just one of those things where it takes time to get up to speed with these, and it just takes that into account.
Any more questions? We'll take the vote. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mrs. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Riley?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion carried. Want to thank you and all of the people who worked on this project, whoever they were that helped develop it and put it together. I am sure there's some people out there who are not totally happy with what we did, and some who are saying what we did. But I think at the end of the day, what we have developed here is a much better ordinance than we had when we started. And certainly like anything else, if we find there are things that need to be tweaked, they can be tweaked in the future at any point in time that someone wants to bring it up and talk about it. So this is not forever and ever and ever, but this is certainly, I think, a great improvement of what we had.
I
And
agree.
will benefit the public and everybody with a much better ordinance. So thank you all for everything you did, Mr. Lawson, and you and Mr. Metalars and Mr. Whitehouse, whoever he is, and everybody else, the committee that worked. I see one's on here that were on the committee. But thank all of you for doing that. It took a lot of time, effort. I think we've ended up with something better for our communities and our county. Thank you, sir.
While Vince is here, can I ask him a quick question?
You certainly can.
I meant to ask you before the meeting, but the county ordinance is a minor subdivision still 4 lots or less, or is it 6 lots or less?
We changed that, so it's not 4.
So it's just not applying to this ordinance, it applies across the board?
Yeah,
So
that's right.
it's now 6?
Yeah, that's correct. We changed that definition.
Is that 6 lots or 5 or less?
Let me look at the definition so I can quote it correctly. That was so it's a good question. That was something that was in there from the time it was introduced, so we didn't go through that today. We didn't have to make any changes to it. That's why it wasn't brought up today. It's any subdivision creating 5 or less lots is a minor subdivision. And we took out some of the other limiting terminology, fronting on existing street and not involving any new street.
And any other language in the code outside of this ordinance
That-
has been amended?
Yeah, that covers across the board. Yeah, yep.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your patience. I know we're in front of you quite a few times over the past.
It was a big deal. It was a big lift.
Yeah.
It takes time to do that.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, thank you.
Good job, Vince.
And then there's an executive session.